everyone. Welcome to the Film for Fans podcast, the podcast from movie fans for movie fans. I am your host, Ryan Dunlevy. That is my co-host, Rob Dunham. In his, what is this, Forward Madison jersey.
Forward Madison, the Flamingos.
The Flamingos.
From Madison, Wisconsin.
There you go. USL 3.
So support grassroots soccer.
I like it.
Yep.
On a side note, I forgot to tell you this earlier. There's a couple sites that you can get and spend like $30 and get mystery kits.
Yep.
I'm thinking about doing that.
Yeah.
So I don't know what I'm going to end up with if you do that. As long as it's not like Arsenal or Chelsea, I'll probably be okay with it.
It's a mystery we don't want to uncover.
However, this is not a soccer kit podcast.
Although everyone should have the shirt because it's just beautiful.
Although I agree, everyone should have a soccer kit.
Yeah.
Just don't go full kit.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, we don't like that.
Okay. Anyway. It is not a soccer kit podcast. It is a movie podcast, and we have an excellent podcast in store for you. We are going to do our full breakdown of Joker Folie, Deux, and we've got some interesting takes on that. So if you're here for Joker Folie, Deux, that will be in our second segment. You can skip down in the look in the podcast note and tell you how far to skip down. We will hit the box office first up, and then we will conclude with our watch list, movies we've watched over the last week, aside from Joker Folie, Deux. All right, you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
So we'll begin with the box office, and Joker Folie, Deux, to no surprise, came in number one in the box office. The actual amounts over the weekend, however, possibly quite a bit surprising. $37.87 million for Joker Folie, Deux. 37, not even quite $38 million. Mm-hmm. And this was being scoffed at a projection of $47 million, and it did almost $10 million less than that. Wow.
Yeah, pretty clear that the returns from the first couple of days where people were panning it impacted how people went the rest of the weekend.
Absolutely. This is clearly a case of bad reviews ahead of time combined with audience feedback put this into the negative camp. And we'll talk a little bit once we get to our full breakdown as to what we think about that and why that reaction might be what it is. But that's your number one, for better or worse. Number two, The Wild Robot in its second week did $18.8 million. That has $64 million in its 2-week total. It was 47% drop off from week one to week two. So solid numbers in week two for The Wild Robot. That still did quite well. Beetlejuice in its fifth week in the box office did $10.1 million, $265 million for Beetlejuice. Massive success there. Transformers 1 did $5.3 million in week three. And that's a drop off 41%. It has about $47.3 million. Again, probably a disappointment based on what they were expecting there. And the top five rounds out was Speak No Evil at $2.7 million in week four in the box office. This movie has made $32 million in its month-long run. Overall, the box office was down 2.6%. So pretty steady from last week to this week. However, with what appeared to be a tentpole movie, I'm sure cinemas were hoping for significantly more. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, but I ran into sold out showings for Joker. Yeah. So I'm confused as to how, like, I rarely, if ever, run into sold out showings for movies that don't do particularly well. Yeah. So I was a little surprised when I saw the numbers come in for Joker.
Yeah, I'm guessing that the majority of the sold out things were people buying in advance, and that once word of mouth got around that it was not being received well, people who were on the fence just didn't go.
Yeah.
Instead of giving it a chance, they just didn't go.
Yeah.
Which, I guess that's kind of how it works. That's fair. We'll get to this in our discussion. I don't agree with them, but a lot of people don't like this movie. So you got to acknowledge that that's an overwhelming sentiment, because it is the overwhelming sentiment from critics and audience that it's not being super well received.
Yeah. I think when I eventually run the themes for this year, it's going to be massive successes and massive underperformances.
Yeah.
And that's what you're going to see. You're going to see extremes at both ends on this front. And I don't really know what to make of that. We'll save the analysis and recriminations for another month or two.
And talking about massive failures, Megalopolis.
Yeah.
You did not hear it in the top 5.
Or the top 10.
Yeah, it made $1 million. $1 million. It's really bad. So we've talked before about how somewhere between 40 and 55% is what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Closer to 40 you are, the better you are.
For a drop off in week 1 and week 2, average should be 55.
Yeah.
So 60 would be a little too much. 50 would be on the good side. Yeah. So 55 is kind of right at that average.
Megalopolis from its first to its second weekend dropped 75%.
Yeah.
And it has made domestically $6.5 million in 2 weeks. Globally, it has made $7.5 million in 2 weeks. And there's a very good chance for a movie with a budget of $120 million, it will not make $10 million total.
Yeah.
And that's just production costs. That has nothing to do with the advertising.
Now, in fairness, there was not a lot of advertising for this movie.
But Francis Ford Coppola basically funded this whole thing himself.
Including selling a stake in his company in order to be able to finance this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the theme of one of the other themes of 2024 is don't self-finance your personal pet project.
Yeah.
As Francis Ford Coppola and Kevin Costner are finding out this year.
Yeah.
Or if you're doing it, 2024 was the wrong year to do it.
Yeah, it's not great. Not great at all.
The other thing you notice here is that, everything in the top 5 outside of Joker has been out for multiple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of other movies are moving the needle. And even on a weekend where there's nothing else to move the needle, Joker still only pulled in $37 million. So, yeah, that's really interesting to see. Any other comments on last week's box office?
No, although I think that this next week might not be a whole lot better.
And probably not.
I'm very interested in seeing what the drop from week 1 to week 2 on Joker is.
It will be interesting. It will be interesting to see what they come up with, or if it's able to kind of hang in there and rebound. All right. So here's what's coming out this weekend. 5 movies, nothing much of note. One of the interesting ones here, Piece by Piece, rated PG. It's an hour and 33-minute runtime. It is a vibrant journey through the life of Pharrell Williams, told through the lens of Lego animation. So it's Pharrell Williams' story told by Legos. It's an interesting collaboration there. That is the thing. Given the fact that it's using Lego animation and the fact that it's PG, leads me to believe this is supposed to be a kids movie.
Yeah.
How many kids are going to see the life of Pharrell Williams? I'm confused as to the market, the decision making.
Well, they know from the Despicable Me soundtrack, obviously.
They do. So, yes.
When I first saw this, I was like, this is an interesting commercial for a TV show. And then I saw it was going to be a movie, and I was like, oh, this is an interesting choice for a niche streaming movie. And then I saw it was going to be in the theater, and I thought, but why?
I don't know. The Lego movies have done well. The Lego movie did well. Lego Batman did well. The Lego, this style has done well.
Yeah.
And has done well with kids. I think it's just strange to do almost like a life story biopic of a pop music star it's strange. It's very strange. To give you an example here, I don't know if you've seen this commercial. Wendy's has a collaboration meal with SpongeBob SquarePants, the Krabby
I just saw that at
Burger
the
or whatever.
drive-thru today. Yeah,
And I'm like, who is the market for this? This is clearly an adult meal, yet it's a SpongeBob theme adult meal. Like who are the adults going there? Like, I need to get this Krabby
I mean, this
collaboration
might make
meal.
you feel really old. Most of the people who watched SpongeBob when it first came out and loved it are now adults.
I get that, but are they still that into SpongeBob? Like, if this was Star Wars, I would understand it. But like,
I'm probably going to get it somewhere. I'm still on SpongeBob.
Fair enough.
Oh,
So maybe there are more people like you,
yeah,
only for Pharrell Williams.
Yeah,
I don't know.
just so Plankton doesn't get his hands on it. He's been looking for that formula.
But it is a very strange, seemingly collab idea. Maybe it's a kids friendly enough story that parents are just gonna be like, "Hey, this is the kid."
I can't wait to get my Snoop Dogg Lego. He's in this movie, so
of course he's in this movie.
Yeah,
of course he is.
I don't. I decided to. Yeah, I don't understand. Who came up with this? First of all,
Yeah.
Who said, "Yeah, that's a good idea," and how are there so many people that said, "Yeah, that's a good idea," that it actually got made?
And compared to all the other good ideas of movies that can't seem to get pushed through.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, we'll see. Let's just put it that way. We'll see. Another kind of probably the second biggest movie that's coming out this weekend is Saturday Night, rated R, hour 49 minutes. At 11:30 p.m. on October 11th, 1975, a ferocious troupe of young comedians and writers changed television forever. Find out what happened behind the scenes in the 90 minutes leading up to the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live. So kind of telling a little bit of the backstory of the origins of Saturday Night Live. And
Okay.
and yeah. And our set decorations are coming down. Let's just sit that on the floor.
Yeah. Dreams within dreams over here.
Yeah.
All right.
So now that our set pieces are no longer falling off the walls, we'll continue. The Saturday Night Live obviously is a very unique story and a very unique thing, especially the early days of Saturday Night Live. So there's a level of intrigue here.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, there was some pretty crazy stuff that happens. This kind of reminds me a little bit of if remember Steve Jobs, how the movie took place in like the half hour before each of three product launches. So it's a similar kind of thing. In terms of a compressed timeline story thing that will then get you into a lot of the other stuff. So Saturday Night Live. Next up, The Apprentice, an hour and 36 minutes. It's a story of a young Donald Trump started his real estate business in the 70s and 80s in New York with the help of infamous lawyer Roy Cohn, starring Sebastian Stan and Jeremy Strong. That's some hair right there, man.
Yeah.
Fitting with the show called movie called The Apprentice.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, Average Joe, PG-13, hour and 50 minutes. A Marine who becomes a high school coach takes a legal stand to defend freedom and religious liberty for everyone, starring Amy Acker, Eric Close, and Austin Woods. And lastly, My Hero Academia.
Yep.
My Hero Academia.
Mm-hmm.
You're Next. So there have been multiple versions of this anime movie series. The newest one comes out. It's PG-13. It's an hour and 50 minutes long. And Deku Bakoku and Todoroki and the rest of the UA High School 1A must face off against Dark Might and the obscure crime organization under his control, the Golini family. So if you're into anime, there's another anime entrant for you. Anything stand out to you here?
One other note on The Apprentice.
Yes.
What's interesting is some of the people who helped finance this movie, who, I don't know if you saw this, but some of the people who helped finance this movie who are supporters of Donald Trump were not happy with how he was portrayed in the movie that they paid for.
Yeah. proud par for the course the whole way around. Yeah. Interesting.
But yeah, out of all those, Saturday night would be the one that I'm interested in. I'm probably going to go see it.
I actually almost did go see it yesterday. I ended up seeing something else.
Well, it's a good thing you didn't because yesterday was Friday.
Yeah.
You're going to go see it. You should go see it tonight.
All right. Yeah. I got you.
It's Saturday, by the way, if you're not listening to the podcast.
We're recording this on Saturday. So
yeah,
that's where that joke comes from. Okay. Any other thoughts on the box office here?
Like I said, I don't think we're going to see a rebound this week.
Nope, I don't think so.
Looking forward, I really like. There's really not another huge weekend until the weekend of Thanksgiving. Weekend before Thanksgiving, Gladiator and Wicked will both be coming out.
Yeah,
which I think will do pretty well.
There's another one I saw that I'm really interested in now. I'm blanking out on what it is. I saw a trailer for it yesterday, and it comes out in November, early November, and now I'm completely blanking on what it is. As a side note, we'll do maybe next week or something. We'll do our fall movie preview for what's coming up the rest of the year. But coming up at the beginning of next year is the new Bong Joon movie. Did you see it? It's Mickey 17, I think it's called.
Yep, I saw the trailer for it.
You get one guess as to what the visual things were inspired by.
I only saw the trailer once, so I don't remember it super well.
Watch the trailer again and tell me if not half of the visuals are directly based off Empire Strikes Back.
Okay.
Including like the ice scenes and the outfits.
Which would probably be a good thing.
And yeah, so it's for me, it was glaring. It's the first thing I look at. Oh, we're doing Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
It looks like a really cool movie. It comes out in January.
So essentially in this movie, there are multiple variants of this or clones of this person. And in order for each one to survive, they have to kill the one previous. And,
or that one dies.
And at least two of them end up being alive at the same time when they're not supposed to. And that looks like multiples of them.
Fun accent from Robert Pattinson in this one.
And Robert Pattinson, the guy who directed Parasite, I'm very intrigued.
Yeah, it looks good. But that's coming up in January.
And just as a very brief preview, because this is relevant to my movie-going experience, I was planning to go see Wicked in IMAX at King of Prussia, because full format IMAX at King of Prussia. And they've been advertising they'll be in IMAX. That weekend, before Thanksgiving at King of Prussia, they're actually using the IMAX for Gladiator 2.
Oh, okay.
So, although Wicked was filmed in IMAX, it will not be in the full format IMAX at King of Prussia. They are doing it in the 40X theater, which is like the motion and effects thing, which I want to do at some point.
I would like to do that at some point.
But they're not doing it in the IMAX, which is very interesting. It's going to make probably, if it's that way around the country at the big full format IMAX theaters, that will make a significant impact on the financial outcomes for both those movies, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Because usually they try, especially working with IMAX, they usually try and space those out.
I mean, out of the two, I guess it would be hard to argue that you shouldn't put Gladiator 2 in, but out of the two, as far as the visual spectacle go, you would think that Wicked would be like the bigger.
I wouldn't.
I don't
know. Like they're both, but like the epic battle sequences, the Colosseum. I'm not a Wicked person, so I don't care.
You're pretty good.
Yeah.
So the episode of this podcast needs to be "I'm not a Wicked person."
Yeah. We'll do an upcoming preview on what's coming out the rest of the year for you in the next couple of weeks here. Shall we turn the page to Joker Folie Deux?
Yes.
All right. So now we begin our discussion, our full breakdown of Joker Folie Deux. If you, we're going to do an initial segment up front where we'll do no spoilers and just give you our general thoughts. We'll give you a spoiler warning, and then we'll dive into our thoughts on the movie itself. We've got a lot to cover on this. So initial reaction, initial thoughts to the movie, leaving spoilers out.
So my initial reaction, this is purely based on my personal preferences is that I love the movie.
Hmm.
However, the person who was sitting next to me, well, there was a husband and wife sitting next to me when I saw this movie. And the wife got up and said, "Well, that was the biggest waste of the last 2 hours of my life," and like left. And the husband just kind of sat there, like she was out of the theater before he moved. And I was like, he was just really quiet, and I was like, I actually thought that was brilliant. I loved it. And he goes, "Yeah, yeah, it was really good." And then he said, "You'll have to excuse my wife. She doesn't really think much."
Okay.
On the same, but on the same at the same token, I can fully understand why someone would extremely dislike this movie. But I'm not that person. But I fully understand why.
I have a theory about that,
we can get into that,
which we will talk about later in this. Yeah, my initial thought is, and we talked a little bit about this last week, is I liked it more than I liked the other one. I am not a musical person, but I was not horribly thrown off by the musical numbers. At times, I was about the amount of music in there. There were multiple times I'm like, again, but that's just I'm not a musical guy. There are some interesting things within the storyline. I can pick out some things that I don't think were as great. And I have a theory as to why I think a lot of people don't like it. And there's kind of a twofold theory on this. I think the acting was good. I think in general, I mean, Lady Gaga has an excellent voice. So featuring that as they did made sense. Joaquin Phoenix, not as much, but he was.
I mean, he can sing a little bit though. He was
fine.
He was really good and walked around, I thought.
And it was not, I think in part because of the musical numbers, it was not as overly dark as the first movie, which can't be anything but a positive for me as someone who thought the other one was too dark. But in general, I would say I liked it. I think it was a pretty good movie. We talked about whether it would be in my top 10, and at this point, probably. But I think that's more of a reflection on the lack of quality movies this year than it is a sheer statement on my personal quality of the movie. However, there is one thing that we'll get into on the breakthrough that I really did enjoy and thought was well done. Anything else you want to say before we get into the spoilers?
No.
Okay. All right. There's your spoiler warning. We are going to talk details about the movie specifically. If you have not seen it, you can look in the show notes and figure out where to skip to the next segment. But now let's break it down a little bit here. I have a couple of categories to talk about, and then we can get some more free for all stuff. The acting, primary mains here would be Lady Gaga and Joaquin Phoenix. What did you think about the performances from each one of them?
So I think Joaquin Phoenix has just established himself as you can bank on a good performance.
Yeah,
for him, this is no different.
With the notable exception of Napoleon.
Yeah,
Napoleon just wasn't.
He came up a little short enough.
All right, I'll give you that one. Okay. All right. Fair enough.
You surrender. Yeah, but so the Joaquin Phoenix, very, very good. Lady Gaga, I don't think there was necessarily a whole lot for her to do acting wise. So I'd give her kind of a middle of the road score. Her character was very much like there wasn't a lot of nuance to her character, so there wasn't a lot to really judge. I think she did well with the material she was given.
Yeah, and I would say like she is significantly better actor than like when you saw other pop stars try to act. Off the top of my head, Britney Spears and Mariah Carey come to mind. She's significantly better than that.
Yeah.
So she can hold her own legitimately as an actor. But yeah, I would say her performance seemed competent.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't say from the acting side of it, it was a mind blowing performance. Joaquin Phoenix, obviously, like this is a type of role that he excels in, kind of that where he has to be a little bit mental, where he has to have a lot of stuff going on in his head at the time, and how he has to interact with the characters around him. He really does get into a role very well.
I don't know if there are. I don't know how many actors there are that can actually let themselves go to a place where they don't care what you think about their character, what their character is doing. Because one of the things that I think people who don't like this movie probably don't like about it is his performance, because he is completely shameless. And you don't see that in a lot of films. So people might be uncomfortable with how much he's just like out there.
Yeah.
Because it's very clear that he's just thrown himself completely into it and doesn't care what people think.
Yeah. Now, I would say, based on what his character has to do in this movie and where they take his character, I would say in terms of performances, the performance is probably not as standout as it was in the original Joker film. But I think that's more along the lines of what the script and the story was having him do, rather than it was based on performance. If that makes
One
sense.
thing I'd be very interested to know, this is a breakdown, this is a spoiler to a specific scene, we're already in the spoiler section.
Yeah.
Is in the courtroom, I want to see the script and see if it was actually written in the stage direction for him to do like 4 different accents, or if he just chose to do that. Because I thought that was a very interesting choice. And to me, it made sense for his character to do that, because his character is just like in 12 different places at once in his mind.
Yeah.
And thinks he's the star of like his whole universe. So he's essentially, what I saw in that moment was him living out like his own courtroom drama, and he was playing all these different roles, things that he had seen on TV, or things that he had read, or things that he thought were the expectation of someone who's defending a case.
Yeah.
When in reality is making him look like a moron. Not like the judge was like super mad at him for how he was acting, and probably would not have flown.
There's no way that
would not
actually
have flown in a real courtroom.
No, definitely not.
But that's another thing where I could see people being like, "That's just stupid."
Like, there's just no way on multiple levels in terms of that. Yeah.
But then again, we're in Gotham. It's not it's not New York City.
Yeah.
It's not Chicago. It's not a real place.
Yeah. All right. So now we get to the characters. There was a little bit of overlap there. But your main characters, Lee, I think, is Harley Quinn, essentially Harley Quinn's name in the film. And of course you have Joker, are your main characters. There are also some recurring characters from the prison and in the courtroom and some of those type of things. Let's start with the mains. What did you think about the characters themselves?
So they did say at one point in the movie that the Lee's name was Harley Quinzel.
They did. Yeah.
And so Lee would be the name she was going by.
Yes.
But Harley Quinzel, Harley Quinn.
Yeah.
Like, not too hard to figure that out. The movie kind of made me sad. And actually, I'm gonna argue against the fact that the first one was darker, because I think this one actually might be darker.
Okay.
Because of what actually happened in the story.
Okay.
So this movie is absolutely a tragedy. Like, this is a Shakespearean type tragedy, this movie. And I think that it doesn't really work outside of the framework of the first one existing.
Yeah.
It's a continuation of, and maybe the end of a story. I could see them doing something beyond this, but to me it seemed like it was a finishing point.
I would say, yeah. I mean, you can never tell with Hollywood. They'll figure
Yeah.
something out if they want to.
I like what they did with the Joker character in this because it made him more vulnerable because it opened him up to feeling things and then having them taken away. So the question is, the age-old question: is it better to have loved and lost, or never to have loved at all?
Yeah.
And in the first movie, he very clearly was not loved by anyone.
Yeah.
Um, and when you have someone who's that beaten down and just like in the pit the whole time, it's very dark. And that's why I think a lot of people would say the first one was darker. However, I think when you're given a ray of sunshine and it's taken away, I think that's almost darker because you're presented with this idea that someone finally does care about him,
Mm-hmm.
but then it's shown that they only cared about him because of who they thought he was, not who he actually was. That to me was the strongest part of the movie, and to me made it darker than the first movie.
I can see where you're going with that. I think there is more of a redeeming value, as it were, or not redeeming value is not right. There is there's more lightheartedness even throughout. It's yeah, lightheartedness again is not the right word.
Yeah.
There's more moments of perceived happiness or perceived joy or um, something that's happening that is not in and of itself inherently dark and evil.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the first movie, basically everything that happened was dark and evil. And so that's where I would say, but I can see coming from where you're talking about, I can see how you might characterize that in that way. So uh the character of Harley Quinn for me here leaves a little bit to be desired. I feel like there was and I'll get to this a little bit with the story. It was a bit underdeveloped in terms of there was things they started to go into and then didn't. And the exploration of her character was a little bit minimal. While she was an impetus to the story and in there, I think you're left a little bit to be desired from that character, from my standpoint. As for the character of the Joker, they really did try to explore the depths of what was going on with him, where he was at, where he was coming from, how he was dealing with the situation. So I think there was a level of robustness to his character. And I'll get to this a little bit when we talk about the story, but I don't know if where they ended up with his character in the second movie really makes sense of the first movie. If that makes sense. But they did get you more into his character, more into his story, anything along those lines.
Well, I think too that we were supposed to have this big emotional reaction to the reveal that Harley was acting like it was all an act. She checked herself into the place, she checked herself out. But like you said, I don't think there was enough built-in depth there for that to have any real impact. Like when it happened, I was like, well, yeah, that makes sense.
And then to leave that underexplored as an element, I think left something to be desired in the character. I would argue that ends up being more on the writers than it does on the characters themselves and the story. But yeah. There were a few side characters, back characters. Any of them stand out to you?
The big, I think the person who had the most screen time besides them was Brendan Gleeson's character as the guard. I think he's a really good actor.
Yeah.
A lot skinnier than he's been in a lot
of
things.
Yeah.
Which was really different to see. But playing that like old world cop who or I guess he's a prison guard, but he has a lot of problems with people.
Yeah. But it's interesting because you can tell, and I think he does a great job. You can tell he actually likes and cares for
Mm-hmm.
the character,
Yeah.
the Joker character. Yeah. He likes him. He cares about him. He is amused by him, and kind of looks out for him a little bit. And it seems genuine, and it comes across as genuine, as does his sense of betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
That comes up in a later scene. And I feel like he was by far the biggest standout side character.
Yeah, I mean the character that I would have wanted to see more of, but I don't know how you fit it into the story because I think they used him where he belonged. But also, I could see the fact that they put this character in the movie to be how they continue would be Harvey Dent.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you got this, but in the courtroom scene after the bomb goes off, they panned over the crowd, and Harvey Dent was sitting on the railing, and half his face was covered, like half his face was blown up. Yeah. So that's there's the origin of Two-Face.
Yeah.
So if they're going to continue it, that's where it builds out of. And I thought the guy who played him did really well for what he was. I mean, basically, he was only the district attorney. He didn't really do anything else. Yeah,
there was not a lot to his character. They didn't go there very much. But he was there in the background. I think he did fine for what he did.
I mean, he's basically just the element of prosecution in the courtroom scenes is all he really did. You didn't really see him other than they had a couple press conference snippets and stuff where he was talking about the case.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's go to the story. What did you make of the story that they told in this particular one?
Why don't you start?
Okay. All right. So it's interesting. It's a fairly static story in that he's already been captured. He's in prison. He's awaiting trial, and everything takes place with him basically in his prison and at the trial, and everything goes through. And you get what has happened in the meantime from the backgrounds. You get the fact that there's been like huge media coverage of him and his case. There's been a TV movie. He's kind of notorious, as it were. They're trying to determine mental competency versus sort of insanity plea versus is he competent to stand trial. There is the story of how he meets Harley Quinn, and a lot of the middle of the story is their romance, their kind of budding romance, as he's preparing for trial and as he's going up. And then there's the culmination, which is kind of his trial and what happens in the aftermath there. Mm-hmm. So from that standpoint, it's a fairly static story. So instead of it being driven by narrative, it's being driven by characters, and this particularly the interaction between Harley Quinn and Joker, and their relationship and what that means and what that's going on. But I think for me, the top part of the thing I like best about the story is possibly something that people don't like about it. And that a lot of the story is, here is this guy. Here is this character. He's in jail. He's murdered people. He's awaiting trial. And a lot of the story revolves around telling a commentary about how various parts of society view criminals. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the most fascinating part. Now I want to get back to that, but I have a longer dive, so I want to let you get in before I jump back into that piece of it.
So the thing that struck me most about this story is that I think the overwhelming majority of the story never actually happened. Like I think the majority of the movie, and I'm very interested to watch the movie again to try and figure it out, is actually happening in his head, especially the music stuff. We get to that
Yeah.
in a little bit, but
And you get a glimpse of that early on when he's looking at the TV.
yes,
Then you get a big musical
it's
number.
like very clear after that scene that the whole thing never happened.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious as to how much of this movie actually happened, or how much of it was just him hoping it might happen, or
which was an element they brought from the first movie, because you had a big segment of that in the first movie as well.
Yeah, what I said to the so that couple, the guy who stayed, and I chatted with him for a little bit. I said to him, and I think I said this when we previewed the movie, and I feel like I was correct, that a lot of this movie would be basically what happened in the first movie, where he was in that one scene in the bathroom where he was doing like the ballet dance thing, and he was in his head. And I thought this movie would be like what was actually going on in his head in that moment. And I kind of feel like that's what this movie was. Some of it certainly happened, but I think a lot of it was his fantasy. One thing, I don't know if you caught this, but one thing that also brought this out to me, when he was being escorted from the place with all like the crazy, like violent people to the other wing of the prison, all the guards' umbrellas were different colors when there was a music thing going on. And then right before they took him in, they showed it again. They were all black.
Yeah.
So like all of that was in his head. Like he's imagining like, oh, they're taking me, like they're escorting me here to like because I'm special. And it's just because like the guard was trying to do something to make himself look better, I think, more than it was him. So you said he cared about him, but I think a lot of that was motivated by the fact that the guard wanted recognition more than he cared about the Joker himself.
He clearly has some of his own stuff going on.
I think a lot of the movie, the guard, the guy who's interviewing the Joker, like he very clearly wants to get a reaction because he wants people to recognize his like amazing interview.
He's being a journalist, where it's like he wants his gotcha moment. He wants his
Harley's obviously completely using him because of what she thinks he is, which turns out he's not. So I think that like a lot of the story is people trying to get out of him what they think he is. And you see that too when the courtroom explodes and he's rescued by these people who are dressed up in his outfit, and like he wants to get as far away from them as possible. Because I think in that moment he realizes that what they're doing is not what he intended.
Yeah.
And we see that in whatever kind of leadership figure you want to put in place who says or does something, and then people carry it out to the like nth plus degree.
And so this is kind of what I want to get at. And because I think this is the crux of the story. I think this is the strongest part of the story and the thing that I like best, even though it may not have been the focal point. It's you have him, you have what he did, and then the primary crux of it is how everybody else views him, how everyone views him, the actual criminal, the actual person who did the actual things he did. And then everyone seems to want to come in and write on top of him their own view of society and their own view of the way the world works. You see it with his psychologist and his lawyer. They are firmly on board of it's not his fault. You know, he is a victim. He is a victim of society. He is a victim of circumstance. He is a victim of everything that has happened to him. It's not his fault. The willfully blind, naively empathetic characters who want to view the criminals as products of society or poor upbringing. There's no personal responsibility. Everything, it's all been pushed on them. Then on the other wing, you have the revolutionaries who want to use him and his thing to overthrow society, to move all of the ills of society, and to use him and his character and what he did as an impetus to overthrow society. You have Harley, a clearly who is now a highly educated, upper class, highly privileged person who wants to cosplay, who wants to cosplay the criminal, who wants to cosplay, who has this fascination with the lower class and the victim, and wants to play the role of victim and wants to play this. And she wants to be all about the Joker as long as he doesn't crash her fantasy of what she wants from him. So every single thing around him is trying to put their view of the world onto him as a character. And I think that's something that's absolutely relevant that we've seen, even to the point of Harvey Dent, the district attorney. He's sane. He's a criminal. He needs to go to jail. Now, I think that's probably the closest one to like the accurate way of doing this. But a lot of the movie is exploring his reaction to every single element of society that wants to put their particular view onto him and make him the poster child for whatever their pet theory about how the world operates is. And I think that's fascinating. I think it was fascinating exploration. I think they did a fantastic job of that. And so what you see periodically is when he gets pushed so far to this, and then he's like, no, and then he reacts to it. He does it with the psychologist by just ignoring her when she's trying to tell him he's got multiple personalities. He just won't talk to her. He eventually does it with his lawyer when she keeps trying to go down the road of you were abused as a child and that's why you're like this, to the point where he fires her. You just mentioned the scene in the car where the revolutionaries, he comes out of the revolutionaries and he's like, no, I don't want any part of this. Like, this is not what I want. And you even see it in his reaction to Harley, because he starts to question her once he finds out what's going on with her. And at the end, he's not in his Joker. He's not in his Joker makeup when he goes and approaches her at the end. He wants to be with her, but he wants to be with her as he is, not as the character she wants him to be. So in each case, he's reacting against the view of society that everyone wants to put on him. And I think that's fascinating.
So based on that, let me ask you this, is maybe jumping ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
However, is this movie asking too much of a general audience? And is that why people are not responding to it?
Yes, largely. I think it is for multiple ways. One, I think you are asking them to think at a level they were not necessarily anticipating having to think at for this movie. I also think, and this jumps ahead a little bit to the musical element, I think the type of person who would appreciate the machinations of his mind in musical form are not the primary people who are super excited to see this version of Joker. So I think, again, it's that who are you making this movie for element, I think, really hurt it, because the music is not enhancing most of the audience's understanding of this character and this story, because they're not necessarily a ton of people that gravitate towards that. Like, the Venn diagram of overlap between those two things is small.
I would argue, however, that I think the choice of music stylistically is a perfect fit for what would be going on in his mind.
Yes, and we will get to the music for sure. But I think the combination of they're asking you to think a lot more. They're asking you to put up with a style or a method of storytelling that is not native to the people who would be drawn to these movies and this character. And I do think there's an element of the story where I think there's a little bit of non sequitur to where his character lands in the second one and where his character finished the first movie. Like, can you really get there?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure you can. I'm not sure, like, the one who's riding off as he sets the city on fire
Yeah.
after just murdering people, is that character really going to come around to accept
Mm-hmm.
basically who he is and what he is? I'm not sure. I'm
Yeah,
not
and we
sure.
did say that all the way back to when this was first announced, like
Mm-hmm.
we're not sure how is this going to connect,
Yeah.
and clearly for a lot of people it didn't.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the show Frasier?
Um, I'm familiar with the concept of Frasier. I've
Okay,
seen a few episodes here and there.
I feel like this is a movie that Frasier Crane would really like, and the the segment of people who would be like him and like this movie is pretty small.
Yeah.
And I absolutely think it's more accurate to say that you're asking too much of an audience in the way this was marketed, because it was marketed as high level Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga, the Joker.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there was some snippets of the musical elements and stuff in the trailers. I could tell by the trailers a lot of this was going to be like fantasy
Mm-hmm.
type stuff, but I think it goes so far that I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair to criticize or put down the audience for not reacting to this movie,
Yeah.
because I do feel, and this might be a reason why it has been received so poorly, is as much as I felt from watching the trailers and stuff that I
Mm-hmm.
knew kind of was going to happen. I think for a general audience moviegoer who only saw this trailer one time, didn't like really like dig deep into it, even if they had seen the first one, I kind of feel like, I don't know how you feel, but I feel like the promotion of this movie was disingenuous to what actually happened in the movie. And we've talked about that before with trailers.
Yeah. I maybe. Maybe. I'm not sure. I mean, it's hard to go back and unlearn things that we already
Mm-hmm.
knew.
Mm-hmm.
Like we knew, because we've been in this doing this, that this was going to be a musical like from the get-go.
Yeah.
So I wasn't expecting anything different. Um, I would have to relook at how it was marketed to get a sense of how somebody else who was just familiar with the first movie, who was not watching a ton of trailers and all
Mm-hmm.
those things, how they would have perceived that. I would have to go back and redo. You're possibly
I
right.
mean, I would say with promotion, it was promoted as like more of a big budget,
Mm-hmm.
like big character movie, and it's really more of a, I don't want to say an independent movie, but its themes are so much deeper than like
Yeah.
a regular tentpole movie would
Yeah.
be.
Like I no, I this is one of my all-time favorite movies. So I'm not going to compare them
Mm-hmm.
on the same level, but The Fountain is a
Mm-hmm.
great example. It was a high concept movie that, the moment the movie was done, those of us who were in there who loved that type of thing were loving it. And there were many other people standing out in theaters like, what did I just watch? What was that? I don't understand how, like,
Mm-hmm.
so I think there was a very similar reaction to this one. All right. Let's get to the music. Let's talk about the music. How did you feel about them, making it a musical? How did you feel about like the number and the way they used the music, and then comment on the numbers themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole point of making a musical was what I've touched on earlier, is that a lot of it is just the outworking of what's happening in his mind.
Mm-hmm.
And we, like you said, we see that from the very first musical number where he's dancing around the prison room, singing a song after he's watching a cartoon. Someone asks him a question, and his response to the question is to dance around the room singing. And it starts off with him singing a cappella, and then all of a sudden this band like slowly comes in, and got like this whole band who's dancing around. You're like, I don't know if this is really happening. And then it like cuts to one of the other prisoners saying, Arthur, answer his question.
Yeah.
And he hasn't moved. So like it's very clear that all of that was just, he was just thinking, he didn't actually do it. He was thinking about doing it.
Yeah.
And I said before, I think the choice to go with like the 30s, 40s, 50s,
Mm-hmm.
and some cases like even older hymns, Like they reflect his upbringing, I think, and they reflect the kind of person he would want himself to be, like a gentleman kind of thing. And we've seen that with some of this, some of the response to the first movie saying like this reflects negatively on culture, like toxic masculinity in some ways. I think is reflected in the music of like this is who he wants to be. And to me it's not out of place. However, it's not gonna land with a lot of modern audience because they're just not connected to it. So I think it was the right choice for how it was utilized. So I'm asking myself the question, like, would have been better if it wasn't a musical? Because if it's the right choice for that to be the music, do you sit back and say, this is absolutely the kind of music we should use, but people are not going to like it. So what do we do?
Yeah. I think in terms of the music, how did it need to be? I don't think it needed to be a musical. What I would say is like, there would have been room, like, say you chop the number of musical numbers in half. Then it feels a little bit like a more of an element of storytelling. And I think would not have been as disruptive to the overall movie as the number they chose, which is perfectly in line with most, musicals of that nature, where there's significant amounts of musical numbers. I think they could have split the baby on this one, and I think it might have been better off for doing so, because you could have gotten the key like fantasy elements of his head in there. You could have gotten a few numbers of their collective fantasy between him and Harley, and a few elements to like make certain points, without it feeling like, yes, I'm watching a full-on musical. Like I said, there were moments where I was like, another one, like just do something else, like move the story along a little bit more, because I don't think the musical numbers served to move the story forward. It was more reflective on what's happening. Like you said, a lot of it was like what he's thinking, what he's feeling, and what's in his mind at that particular time. That being said, I mean, there were a number of the musical, like the music itself, I enjoyed, like the kind of retro vibe. Obviously, Lady Gaga is a phenomenal voice and does that. So I enjoyed some of those elements.
I mean, I think like one thing that I really, really liked was how the very beginning of the movie, the first music that you hear is the guard whistling when the Saints go marching in. And that's like very clearly that's his like wake up theme. Like they don't show it every time. They establish that this is what he does every morning. And then the prisoners themselves co-opt it. And I really like how they like started singing it, and it infuriated the guard. And by extension, infuriated everyone on the staff to the point where they're like beating them up for using this. And it, to me, that was a great example of not letting people who are it's hard to say they're being oppressed because they're in prison, because they're violent, psychotic criminals, but taking something that is being used. I don't even necessarily know if the guard was doing that to taunt them, or was just like what he did.
Seemed more like that was his thing. Like that's his that's how he gets through his day. That's what he likes, because it shows later like he got Arthur into the singing thing because he wanted to sing. So that seems to look more like his thing.
And I will say with in relation to Joaquin Phoenix, I'm not necessarily going to judge his singing ability on this movie, because I think that part of his character demands that he not be a great singer.
I can, because, and it wouldn't put past him to do that.
I think in Walk the Line, he proved that he can sing. So I think it's part of his character that he's not 100% confident.
Certainly possible.
His singing ability. And Lady Gaga, even though she sings well in this movie, does not sing in the same way that she sings on stage, like full of vibrato and like full chest voice. And it's a different kind of character for her too. But it very clearly shines through that she's like a trained singer, even when she's singing like
for sure
not confidently.
Yeah. Let's get into a few things. Was there anything you didn't like about the
film? So I did mention the courtroom scene. I didn't love like the constantly changing accent thing he did that I mentioned. I'm not sure. Like, I guess I understand why he did it because, like I said, it's happening all in his mind that he's not really landing on how he wants to approach things or what the right way to do it is. But there are times where he's talking like the Southern accent, and like times he's talking like almost an English accent, and then times he's talking as himself. And they're all kind of mixed together. Some like the funniest part of the entire movie was some of his interactions in that courtroom with the other people when he was like questioning them.
Yeah.
But the movie as a whole isn't really made to be funny. So
yeah.
Like I said before, I'm on a whole, the movie made me sad because everybody wants to have someone care about them. And he finally seems like he has someone who cares about him, but she doesn't. She only cares about what she thinks he is. I think that is a huge high level theme that a lot of people deal with and struggle with. And some people probably don't even realize they deal with and struggle with it. I mean, imposter syndrome is a huge thing. Like, people only like me because, or people don't like me because.
Yeah.
And so the question is like, who really cares about you for who you are?
Yeah.
And that's why, to me, it was very dark because in the end of this movie, there's no one for him.
Yeah.
I mean, he killed his own mom. Like,
yeah. There were a couple things for me. One, I think one of the primary ones is like the underdevelopment of the Harley Quinn character. In particular, like once you find out that she's like an upper class, like rich psychology student who comes from a great family. It's like there was more there to explore, and there was more there for him to dive into, especially in their, she kind of breezes in and then kind of breezes out of his life. And there's elements there that were available to them to explore and to make that impact greater. And it just didn't quite have the impact. Like the interaction with them where she's out of jail, he's in jail, and he's asking her about this. Like that should have been like a catalytic moment. And it felt a little bit flat. Like she kind of gives her action, oh, I just wanted to be with you. And then he just kind of buys that. Like it didn't kind of, with his background and with his past and with everything they've built up about his character, about not having anyone who likes him, for him, like that felt like it should have been a bigger moment, and it wasn't. And then they didn't explore it anymore with her. I thought, okay, that moment fell flat. Maybe that's coming back later. And then it really didn't. And so that felt like a missed opportunity. Really kind of minor technical point. Like, was her plan really to get locked up in another ward of the same prison, which he would ordinarily have no reason to ever, like, was that really her plan, to get to know him, was be in a separate prison next to it, that he would have no real way of getting there? Like, it was very coincidental that they would have met, but her plan apparently was to do all that just to meet him. So that was a little off. And like I said, I think the biggest thing is his character lands in a moment of acceptance of what he is, lucidity about who he is and what he's done and what he is and what he isn't. And I just not 100% sure that is the direction his character would have taken based on what they established in the first one. Now, I might be able to be convinced otherwise there, especially if I watched it again. But that would be my other. Do you got anything else here?
Uh, just that. So you and I have. So my end analysis of this whole thing is that you and I have a unique platform to talk to whoever's listening to this slash whoever they tell.
Yeah.
And I think there are certain movies that we see that we're like we get really excited about. We're like, I need to tell everyone I know to watch this movie. And my final analysis of this movie would be it is one that I would only recommend to certain people.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Even though I think it's really, really good.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Not everyone is going to appreciate this or get this.
Yeah. So the question is
100%.
like, how good is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And is there a difference between something being accessible to everyone and something being objectively good?
Yeah.
I think there is. Like that's the whole point of this podcast. But
yeah,
that is a question that's worth asking, I think.
And you're left with questions about who or what as the audience for this movie, just like I was left with more questions than answers about the first movie too. So maybe there's something in that. I don't know. All right, well, we're going to wrap this up because we went long on that particular segment. And we're going to wrap up with our watch list. Movies we've watched over the last week. What did you watch?
I didn't watch anything else.
Okay.
I've had a very, very busy week. My band had a concert today, and
nice.
There was a whole lot of work and family stuff, activities and outings. So,
yeah,
unfortunately, I didn't have a lot of time.
Fair enough. But we spent a lot of time talking about the movie you did watch this week.
Yeah.
So. The one new one I will talk about for a moment is The Outrun. I did go see The Outrun that came out last week, starring Saoirse Ronan. It is a very well done character drama. Basically, Saoirse Ronan's character is an Irish girl who grew up in like seaside country Ireland, who spent most of her early 20s living in London, ends up becoming an alcoholic, and then gets out of rehab, is trying to be sober by living back where she grew up in Ireland. So it is a character drama centered around her character and her character's attempt at sobriety, while dealing with like family issues and her own personal issues and all those type of things. What I would say is I think it was a very well done movie. If you like character dramas, it's well worth check it out. Saoirse Ronan did a great job acting. She has to carry most of the performance on her own, and in that she does a really good job. She is a really, really talented actress. The style of movies she's usually in are not tend to be ones that I love, so I don't see her in a ton of things, but she is very, very good at what she does. And the cinematography is really cool in this one. There's a lots of like really awesome shots of like the Irish coast and walking along the Irish beaches and the waves and the wind. The sound design actually really stands out on this one too, because you're getting lots of those like torrents and waves and wind and all sorts of things along those lines. It only made like $315,000 its opening weekend. It's not in a lot of theaters, but if you do love character dramas, I'm not saying she will be, but this is the type of movie that could get Saoirse Ronan nominated for Best Actress. It's the type of movie the critics like, those like hard character dramas that like very few people see. And so it's in that category. So if you do like that, and I know you do, it could be one you're interested in.
Nice.
All right, that is the show, everyone. Thank you for checking out Film for Fans. Make sure you visit filmforfans.com, like, subscribe, tell your friends, and until next time, enjoy the movies.